public event from that standpoint, governed under the FACA rules, of which J.J. Miller will talk about here in just a second. I'm General Les Lyles. I have the honor, literally the honor, of being named to chair this UAG group, and it is really a pleasure to have our first meeting with lots of things on the agenda for us to cover today. So because of the time constraints, without any further ado, I'll have some other comments here shortly. Let me introduce J.J. Miller, who's going to go through some quick administrative activities, and then I'll introduce our sponsor from the White House.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, everyone. I was going to say this is our call to order, but our esteemed chair just did that for us, so that's wonderful. The User Advisory Group, of course, is affectionately known as the UAG, and because the UAG controls space, you can see we have provided a very warm February day for thanking you for attending. Appreciate that. Actually, as robust as the UAG is, this advisory committee is comprised of experts from outside of the federal government to serve the National Space Council, which is, of course, chaired by the Vice President. And so today we are gathered to learn, to exchange information, and to further develop recommendations that contribute towards meeting Space Council goals of strengthening our nation. In this forum, this is done from the perspective of users or our constituents. The UAG is a committee established under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA, and as such, all our deliberations are open to the public. All UAG members were selected personally by the Vice President and appointed by the NASA Administrator. They are each volunteering their valuable time and expertise, and for that, we are very grateful. They are serving based on their individual expertise, such as special government employees, or to represent specific sectors of the American space industry as representatives. We remind everyone that if a potential conflict of interest arises during our deliberations today, especially for SGEs, that you please recuse yourself from that discussion for the record and do not engage in that particular matter. As a whole, the UAG is intended to be balanced and comprehensive, and such citizen-based committees have supported our nation since its founding, and the contributions made by citizen members have served our nation very well ever since. A key goal of the UAG is to utilize space to help everyone on Earth. This cannot be overstated. However, one perfect example of a space sector that most may take for granted now is the Global Positioning System, or GPS. You have it in your car, and you may have it beside you now, in your phone, or on your wrist as a watch. But don't forget, GPS signals are a national space asset that has become an invaluable worldwide utility, because now it does way more than tell us where we are. It is a dual-use capability that now supports weather forecasting, environmental monitoring, and disaster mitigation, amongst many other things that protect and produce for us all. But we have taken it for granted. Just like the Apollo program, the GPS program operated by General Thompson's Space Force will celebrate its 50th anniversary before the end of this year. And nothing is more symbolic of a single system so capable of helping all of mankind, and which sets the stage for continued growth of applications for decades to come. And it does come under the purview of the National Space Council under Space Policy Directive 7. So on behalf of the GPS user community then, the chair of the National Space-Based P&T Advisory Board, Admiral Thad Allen, who I also support, sincerely appreciates working with General Lyles to work together to recognize this most important 50th anniversary. Finally, I will just mention that the booklet everyone received when they walked in has the agenda, has some information in terms of how we're structured, and most importantly, on the very back, you'll find some information in terms of how the public can continue to contribute towards this initiative to provide information to the federal government in terms of how they're doing. And so we want to make sure that this is always available and that it's not just this group that's providing input, but the American people as a whole. So in closing, please remember that we are broadcasting online right now. So when members comment, please remember to turn on your mics, speak clearly, and turn it off when you're finished. I think that's enough for an opening. And I want to thank General Lyles and Chirag Parikh for the opportunity to serve you all today. Thank you.
Thanks, JJ. Well, it's my honor to introduce Chirag Parikh, who's the Deputy Assistant to the President and the Executive Secretary of the National Space Council. Chirag, thank you.
Thank you, General Lyles, and JJ, thank you very much. I was going to throw in a quip of this message provided to you by the P&T Advisory Board, but you already hit the punchline, so fantastic. Well, good morning, everybody. A day that I've long looked forward to, and so proud to see such smiling faces and an incredible august group of individuals and entities and corporations around the table. And it's humbling, as I said to some of you yesterday, about the gravitas that this group brings together here. I will have to, after 26 years, I have now moved over to this of readers, so if you'll please excuse me here. You know, I think one of the things, as you go into that booklet that General or JJ was just talking about, it has, I encourage everybody to look at these bios. They're incredible. Your experiences, your background, your passion to build a better world really has brought us all together today. And, you know, to the point as well that was made is your time and your commitment. Look, whether you're running large defense industrial base organizations, you're running a startup, you are educating the future of America, you're doing groundbreaking research, every one of you, the time you're investing today is taking away from that, but I believe it's a long-term investment, not just in ourselves, but in our nation and our capacity. So thank you very much for the time there. Finally, to everybody that's online and to the media that are following as well, thank you, because understanding the issues, conveying these issues is just as important as is coming up with these ideas, and we need to make sure that we articulate this. It matters to us, to the Vice President, you know, to understand your perspectives and to spread the message on how we can enable the opportunity of space. So when Vice President Harris convened her first National Space Council meeting in 2021, she made clear that now is the time to capture the opportunity of space. And I think part of that was reflected on that December 1st meeting as you saw some new faces and organizations on the Space Council. You know, it's not just for those who own and operate space systems. It's also for the users of the services coming from those space systems, as well as those who are enabling the future of our workforce, and particularly as we think about entities like Department of Education and Department of Labor. And to that extent, we're proud to expand this Users Advisory Group's representation to include educators, academics, and users of space services. While impossible, and it was a very difficult task to wholly scope the vast and growing scope of this incredible space enterprise into a finite collection of individuals, this UAG does, I believe, have quite the diversity of industries, backgrounds, and applications. And while you represent particular companies, equities, capabilities, our goal here, I believe, is to represent more than the name and organization on your business card, and it's instead to represent the value that space brings to our nation and to our world. Your charge, as per your charter, is to make recommendations to us as the National Space Council on space policy and strategy, laws, regulations, treaties, international instruments, space programs, practices across the entirety of our space enterprise, civil, commercial, and national security. And it's to provide a voice to our perspectives and deliberations that honestly best comes from you and not from the inside. And that's where I think there's incredible value here. If we look at the context of where we are in space, some of this might be preaching to the choir, but I think it's important to articulate publicly as well. We do see how space continues to be a source of American innovation and opportunity, as well as a source of leadership and of strength. Our economy and our everyday ways of lives are powered by space. JJ very well articulated the value of GPS. But the fact remains as well, communication satellites, remote sensing satellites, and this thing called the timing service on GPS has an inordinate value that is hard to reflect and capture in any quantifiable manner sometimes. And even those who do not feel they are directly influenced by space, the upstream elements of our society benefit from space that then has a direct derivative value to the individual, to the family, and to the community. And so, for instance, we have an organization on the advisory group that represents the agriculture community, right? They may not launch and operate satellites, but they have direct value from the work that you guys build and the capabilities that you enable and the users of those capabilities. And that goes down to each individual, whether it's in your phones or it's what you're watching on TV. And so we need to continue to articulate the value of space to our society. I think that narrative often gets lost, back to JJ's point about the fact that space is assumed. What would happen if we didn't have a particular element of space, whether for commercial civil applications or for security applications? And so as we think about the Venn diagram of space, we think about it in the three sectors: civil, commercial, and national security. And what's interesting about that Venn diagram, even when I was working a decade ago on the National Security Council, we saw this happening, and it continues to move in this direction. The Venn diagram of civil, commercial, and national security are becoming more and more overlapped. And a real reason for that is actually because of the people around the table. It's the value that commercial space services are providing to the economy, it's providing to our civil capacity, and it's providing to our national security capacity. And so that's why Space Council is very important to be able to have, and it's why it's important to be able to receive your perspectives, because the impact of one, the movement of one of those circles impacts often the movement of many of those circles. And so we really thank you for that perspective there. And when we see the intersection of public and private partnerships coming together, we literally see great things literally take off. Nothing is probably more visible than the commercial human spaceflight program, where NASA has partnered, and I know Pam will talk about this a little bit later on, about the Commercial Crew program. We were honored to host so many of the people who made the Commercial Crew program happen and made it a reality last month at the White House, when Vice President Harris awarded the Congressional Space Medal of Honor to NASA astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken for their leadership and their bravery in being able to being the first two astronauts to go to the ISS on a Commercial Crew mission, the Demo 2 mission. And think about this. That's the first time that award has been given since 2000. I'm not used to these. Since 2006. And I don't know if people remember that award ceremony or not, but the person who received that award in 2006 was NASA astronaut Robert Crippen. And the reason he received that award was for his bravery on being on STS-1 43 years ago. Think about that. The last time we had a new commercial crew vehicle was 43 years to go, almost to the day. And now we have one that has, soon to be launching Crew 6, and we look forward to another one launching here very shortly as well. It's amazing to think about the time that we are in our space history right now. So that award, that Congressional Space Medal of Honor, went to two individuals, but it really is a reflection of the enduring commitment to further strengthen our public-private partnerships as we consider commercial space stations and other private enterprises that taken on functions that traditionally were inherently governmental. That's a very interesting transition of where we are in our space sector to now. So as you guys move and we deliberate your plans and execution, I'd ask for you to consider, how does space enable innovation? How does space enable opportunity, leadership, and strength for our nation? And I think it's very important to say it in that way too. How does space enable this? as opposed to how does our nation enable space. I think it's a two-way direction, but it's far more important to say, how does space enable leadership, opportunity, innovation, and strength? And just, I think some of the open questions that discuss is how does space power our economy? How do we measure space? How do we measure the economy, whether it's the workforce, the investments, the return on investments, and so on and so forth? How can technologies we develop for space be applied for applications back here on Earth? Think about, clean energy. You think about bridging the digital divide, yielding new discoveries to improve the quality of life on Earth, to include, of course, combating the climate crisis. And of course, boy, I mean, there is 33 stories around this dais right now about how and why we got into the space sector and how space inspired us to be literally at the spot we are today at the table, representing and being able to provide advice for, Vice President and President here. How do we use space to be able to inspire the next generation of our STEM workforce, but also from the last Space Council meeting last year about our skilled technical workforce. The people around this table employ the largest sector of aerospace welders, technicians, electricians, and they are part of the Space Force. Not Space Force, sorry, DT, that can be you later. Space workforce. So, and that's really, really important that we consider all these different sectors. And our national ability, and we got to think about it from a leadership and strength perspective, and you think about it from our national ability, think about what we're building. Large-scale, complex projects, and they absolutely, in the history of the United States, provide tangible measures of American technological capacity, and our successes bolster our credibility with our partners and allies around the world. And so the question is, of course, is our trajectory continuing with these large-scale, complex projects? How can we continue to do that, like with the Artemis program, to maintain, this type of leadership in an era of strategic competition? And speaking of international partnerships and alliances, they're absolutely a strategic advantage for the United States, whether it's through joint exploration of our cosmos, of our solar system, of our moon, but also through national security as well. And it's not just the United States that's interested in space anymore, and we all know that. There's worldwide interest, not just in partnering with space, but developing other national capacities as well. How do we partner with this growing desire? As President Biden and Vice President Harris meet with world leaders, space is so often one of the topics that is talked about. Most recently, Vice President Harris hosted French President Emmanuel Macron at NASA headquarters, and several of our industry were there to be able to discuss the opportunity of industry-to-industry partnerships. Not much thereafter, Prime Minister Kishida of Japan came to the United States, and we talked about everything. We talked about civil space cooperation. We talked about industry cooperation. We even talked about our strategic alliance of national security space cooperation as well. And then just earlier this month, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, as well as his counterpart from India, met to talk about U.S.-India critical and emerging technologies. And one of the areas that they talked about was space cooperation under a national security element as well. But in it, we talked about commercial human spaceflight. We talked about human spaceflight. We did talk about industry-to-industry partnerships. It's not just us anymore, and how do we partner? So how do we see these international partnerships going across all these sectors? And last, and absolutely certainly not least, space continues to underpin our national security and our ability to respond decisively to crises around the world. Last year, the President proposed and the administration received from Congress the largest ever increase in national security space funding, resulting in the largest national security space budget in history. And we aren't just doing the same old things with that funding. The administration is leveraging the most entrepreneurial industrial base, that is you all, in the world to develop groundbreaking capabilities, including Space Force architectures that are designed to be resilient to the threats. Look, I know we're not all there yet. We know that there's further opportunity for commercial partnerships, international partnerships for resiliency as well. We also understand that the threats aren't waiting for us. They're not static and continue to manifest, grow, and evolve. So we're looking for recommendations on that national security front as well of the current and future practices. One last thing I may say, and then I will turn it back over to General Lyles here, is I'd request that the UAG consider how do you leverage government programs in maybe a different way than we've thought about in the past. We often want to develop government programs. We also want to say the government should develop this, or the government should have an account here to do space this or space that. There's a lot of different government initiatives that are going on that I think would be honored to have space as one of the components. Maybe they don't know that space could be one of those components. An example is, a year and a half ago, we brought in Department of Labor into the council. And then at the last council meeting, Department of Labor talked about the fact that they have a apprenticeship accelerator program that, hey, we can bring space into that, and we can bring that as a component. What are other programs that are out there that I'd ask you guys to think about, that instead of us developing space as its own program, space could be part of those programs? Think about organizations like the Department of Education and their STEM initiatives. Think about organizations like USAID and how do we partner further with them. Think about National Science Foundation. So many different organizations that we can think about. And don't just think federally as well. The state and local governments are really interested in being able to support you all as well. And how can we partner from a federal equity perspective with the industry to work with state and local governments as well? So, so we don't need to invent everything ourselves, and I think there's opportunity out there. And I really do believe that. I do believe the opportunity space is incredible. I want to thank everyone again for being here. We do have the opportunity, I believe, not only to bend the arc of history for space, but I do believe of our nation. And to that, General Lyles, I will turn it back to you and look forward to hearing your guys' deliberations.
Great. Thank you very much, Chirag, for those both inspiring words and both the charge and the challenge to the UAG. I think that was very, 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 very clear and very, very important. Thank you. Before we get started with our presentation today, let me just sort of set the stage for both the UAG and particularly the audience out there. Our meeting today is sort of combined into two different sectors. First, it's going to be what I call stage setting, if you will, hearing from different leaders who represent the various entities in our space enterprise, who are going to give us their perspective on their priorities, the kind of things that they are focusing on, and the kind of things they want the UAG and the National Space Council to focus on. So we're honored to have General D.T. Thompson, the Vice Chief of Space Operations from the U.S. Space Force, who's going to obviously talk about military space and national security space priorities. Very honored to have Colonel Pam Milroy, Colonel retired Pam Milroy, former astronaut and Deputy Administrator for NASA. Pam served on the last UAG along with me and a couple of others here who are still part of this august body. And she's obviously going to give us civil space priorities and perhaps a little bit about commercial space, because they sort of go hand in glove, if you will, a little bit for NASA today. We're fortunate to have Dr. Rich DeBello, the Director of Office of Space Commerce, talking about commercial space priorities. And then from a technology standpoint, we've asked Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, the former Associate Administrator and Science Mission Directorate at NASA, to give us a little perspective on science and technology, and particularly over the last couple of years under his charge, the things that NASA's done with missions like DART, et cetera. So that's the stage setting, if you will. We'll take a quick lunch break, and then this afternoon is our chance to hear from each other, if you will, and to share information. We are, as you'll see shortly in a couple of charts, we're divided into 6 subcommittees for this particular group, and we've asked the subcommittee chairs to each give us 5 or 10 minutes, if you will, on what they have been looking at relative to their particular charge and particular mission, their initial thoughts of the kind of things they want to focus on, and where they see their challenges and perhaps the things that might be opportunities. This is a chance for all of us to engage. One of the beauties of a FACA deliberation is that we have to do these kind of things in the public eye for full transparency. And so we want to hear from all of you, not just the chairs. If you have some comments or questions or even thoughts of vectors for each one of those subcommittees, this is a chance for all of us to engage. And so we will do that throughout for the rest of the morning and early afternoon, and then we'll break for the day for another event. So before I ask for, again, the public, for each one of you to introduce yourselves, let me just do a couple of charts really quickly here. again, to set the stage, primarily not for the UAG members, but for our audience as to who we are. What is the User Advisory Group? Next chart, please. I'm not going to belabor this. These charts are available on the web and to the audience, but this is, the history, if you will, of the User Advisory Group, which is started in the last administration as a part of the National Space Council. It is, I think, very well stated as to what its particular function is. It's tasked with advising the Space Council on any and all space policy issues relevant to the stakeholders. Now, you heard that very, very clearly from Chirag. Next chart. The charter, we have a formal charter that defines who we are, what our scope is, what the functions are, and as Chirag really captured, that list of bullets, if you will, provide the kinds of things that we will be addressing and more. There may be some that aren't captured on this list that each one of you has some ideas about, some thoughts about, or things you know that we perhaps should engage more strongly in. When I say we, I mean the National Space Council and the nation writ large. Next chart. We are divided, as I mentioned, into 6 subcommittees. Exploration and Discovery, led by Lance Bush. Lance Bush. My glasses aren't working today. Economic Development and Industrial Base, led by the Honorable Eric Fanning. Climate and Societal Benefits, led by Dr. Kate Marvel. Data and Emerging Technology, led by Professor Dan Hastings. STEM Education, Diversity and Inclusion and Outreach, led by Mandy Vaughn, who also is another member from the last UAG. And then National Security. And like the last UAG, Admiral Jim Ellis, who was the chair, led that particular sector primarily because of security clearances involved. I'm leading this particular sector. And just a word ahead for those who are listed there, I know we have not had a meeting purposely because we want to use this as our stage setter for our first national security activity. I'll talk about that a little bit more. So those are our subcommittees. We have established, like we did last time, an executive committee, which is primarily the subcommittee chairs and me and JJ, who will meet literally as often as possible, primarily to make sure we're sharing information of what each one of the subcommittees are doing. It's no surprise, just looking at the list and listening to Chirag, there's crossover for everything on that list. And so when Mandy's having a meeting on STEM education, diversity and inclusion, I know that touches national security, it touches exploration and discovery, it touches everything. So we want to share what each subcommittees are involved in and offer the opportunity for either the subcommittee chairs or your participants to listen into the other deliberations that are going on. So that's our group here, and we are very, very proud. Today is going to be our kickoff to hear about each one of those subcommittee ideas. Next chart. There are the focus areas for each one of the subcommittees. I'll let you just glance at that. I'm not going to read that. It's sort of obvious, if you will, in so many different respects. But again, very, very happy that we divided up the pie in this particular element. And I'd be remiss if I didn't offer the last UAG had another subcommittee that focused on international. And Chirag is very, very clear that the reason you don't see that here is because just like the other things I mentioned, international involvement cuts across everything that's involved here. And so we expect the subcommittee chairs and the subcommittees to look at the international implications or opportunities in each one of your areas also. So again, very broad brush as to what we're responsible for. Next chart. And I would be remiss if I didn't offer that. We want to improve. We want to make sure both as a group, a UAG, that we're the best and the most efficient we could possibly be. And so we welcome comments from you, comments from the audience, comments from the public as to things they think we might do a little bit differently. And the last bullet there, big ideas for advancing America leadership in space. That's what we're going to be focusing on, but there may be some big ideas or little ideas that become big ideas that somebody's aware of out there that we want to learn about and know about and make sure that we're focusing on. So with that, let me just stop and give an opportunity for our UAG members to introduce themselves. And Lance, I'm going to start with you. We'll go down your row and then come back up this way, and I think that brings us full circle. By the way, I'm left-handed, so I'm starting on the left. So
Hi, I'm Lance Bush. I'm the president and CEO of Challenger Center. Good morning. My name is Ted Colbert. I'm the President and CEO of Boeing Defense, Space, and Security.
My name is Charlie Bolden. I'm a Marine and former NASA administrator.
I'm Jim Takelet. I'm an ex-Air Force pilot and wanted to be an astronaut, but got close. Not like some people. And I'm the CEO and chairman of Lockheed Martin right now.
Hi, my name is Kate Marvel. I am the senior climate scientist at Project Drawdown.
I'm Bob Smith, CEO of Blue Origin.
I am Dave Kaufman. I'm the president of Ball Aerospace.
Hi, I'm Rajiv Badel. I lead Project Kapper at Amazon, Vice President.
Hi, I'm Sian Proctor, and I am a geoscientist and astronaut, and I'm representing the Maricopa Community Colleges.
Greetings, I'm Katrina Hardin-Williams. I'm a mathematics educator and the founder of the Ames Middle School Space Club. I'm excited to be here.
Good morning, I'm Robbie Shingler. I'm co-founder and chief strategy officer of Planet.
Good morning, I'm Mel Strickland, co-founder and CEO of Slingshot Aerospace.
Good morning, Karina Juris, president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation.
Good morning, Jeremy Williams. I'm a member of the Bayer Crop Science executive team, and I lead digital farming solutions.
Ted Mercer, CEO and executive director of the Virginia Commercial Spaceflight Authority, also known as Virginia Space.
Good morning, Marla Perez Davis, former NASA Glenn Research Center director.
Good morning, Ron Lopez, president and managing director of Astroscale US.
Good morning, Patrick Lynn, philosophy professor and technology ethicist at Cal Poly.
Good morning, Nancy Colleton. I'm the president of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Good morning, Daniel Hastings. I'm the department head of the MIT Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics.
Good morning, Bridget Chapman, chair of the board, Women in Aerospace.
Good morning, Dan Jablonski. I'm the president and CEO of Maxar Technologies.
Good morning, I'm Kathy Warden. I'm chair and president of Northrop Grumman.
Good morning, Eric Fanning, president and CEO of the Aerospace Industries Association.
Good morning, everyone. Dawn Hickton, chair and CEO of Cumberland Additive, where we use new technologies to create the metals that go into the rockets and the satellites.
Tory Bruno, CEO, United Launch Alliance, honored to be invited back, and from this point forward, all of yours personal rocket scientist.
And good morning, Mandy Vaughn. I'm the founder and CEO of GXO, Inc.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can see why literally I get chills every time I both look at this group and hear their resumes and the things that they're involved in, both in the past but also particularly today. And I like to say one member of our group could not be here, Dr. Harold Martin. He's the chancellor of North Carolina A&T. I think he's on the web listening in.
That is correct.
And that's right. And Gwen Shotwell, the chief operating officer of SpaceX. And I think that she's also listening in. So thank you to Gwen and also Dr. Martin. We also have one very special member of our group who could not be here. But we really wanted to give him an opportunity to make some remarks to us, and that is the Honorable Buzz Aldrin. Buzz, of course, could not be here. I think most of you know, just recently, a couple weeks ago.
It was my extraordinary
I think we have a tape for Buzz, but I think the tape started too soon there. I maybe mentioned his name and just triggered it. Okay. Yeah, AI will do that to you every time. Buzz, as you all know, celebrated his 93rd birthday just a few weeks ago, and so now he has a special honor that from now on, every birthday will also be his wedding anniversary because he also got married on that particular day too. So let me ask him to now run Buzz's message to all of us.
It was my extraordinary privilege to have played a role in one of the epic dramas of our age, America's race to the moon and back. President Biden and Vice President and Chair of the National Space Council, Harris, now join a distinguished train of visionary leaders. As President John F. Kennedy so inspiringly said at Rice University, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energy and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. We planted the American flag on the moon. We did so not to lay an imperial claim to the moon. As idealistic Americans, we came in peace for all mankind. Now let us salute the memories of those who so heroically sacrificed their lives for the achievement of an impossible dream. On behalf of all of the early space pioneers, let us now tip our helmets to our heroic and worthy successors, President Biden and Vice President Harris, NASA Administrator, U.S. Senator, and fellow astronaut Bill Nelson, Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy, and Associate Administrator Robert D. Cabana. We also recognize the work of General Lester Lyles and James J. Miller, Executive Secretary of the Space Council, UAG. Let me also salute the achievements of human exploration of space by private enterprise with the support of the U.S. government, especially those who aspire to send people past the Kármán line, and especially we astronauts, scientists, and technicians now picking up the torch of deep space exploration, the return to the moon via the inspiring Artemis project, laying the groundwork for the colonization of the moon, a giant leap toward Mars. And if the imagination, intrepidness, and courage of the American people for space continues apace onto the exoplanets of our stars. Thank you, and God bless America, Earth, our galaxy, universe, and the celestial metaverse it is our mutual high privilege to explore.
Thank you, Buzz. What an honor for all of us to have the opportunity to hear from our other member, if you will, of this group, and could not ask for anybody more legendary or respected around the world for his accomplishments in space. So with that, we're going to move into our other speakers that we have planned for today. And the first of which is going to be representing our military space priorities, and honored to introduce General D.T. Thompson. Dave Thompson, the Vice Chief of Space Operations, United States Space Force. Dave, and he has his Space Force uniform on. All right, good. DT, thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here. And you're primarily going to discuss and talk, and please, we're very pleased to have you come here. Thanks.
Okay, let me make sure I've got this. I think it's working. Thanks, General Lyles, Mr. Parikh, Mr. Miller, thanks so much for hosting us today, and greetings to all of you distinguished members of the User Advisory Group. I bring greetings on behalf of the Secretary of the Air Force, Honorable Frank Kendall, and the Chief Space Operations, General Chance Saltzman. It's great to talk to you today a little bit about some of our priorities and initiatives related to the United States Space Force. But before I do that, let me say, JJ, thanks for the shout out to GPS in 50 years. That way I don't have to do it. But I'll add one more point now and maybe one more point at the end, and that is, as JJ said, 50 years ago, 1973, the foundations and fundamentals of the GPS program were established, and we embarked on that journey. In 1995, that constellation reached its full operational capability, and every day since, the performance of that constellation and the services it provides has only ever increased. In fact, today the GPS constellation provides services and capabilities that, in terms of accuracy and precision and the ability to navigate, are 3 times as capable as the original requirement was specified. That's how good that constellation is, and what our space professionals over 50 years have provided for the security of the nation, and also for civil and commercial purposes. So thanks to that, and we're really proud of that. And in fact, actually, I'll pull it forward. We're even talking about perhaps using GPS to navigate around the moon with confidence and precision the way we have around the Earth over the past many years. Okay, so thank you. I also spent a lot of time thinking about what to talk with you about today. I'll start with a very clear statement of our priorities in the United States Space Force. In the 3rd year of our existence, we have exited our terrible twos. We continue to be focused on the charter and the charge given to us by U.S. Congress when they passed the law, what they remind us of every year, and now 2 administrations, and that is our job is to protect U.S. interests in space and everything that entails. And today that primarily means several things. It primarily means, first, ensuring that the armed forces of the United States, our partners and our allies, have the services and the capabilities they need in space to be able to operate globally in any way, shape, or form directed by our national leadership and expected by the American people. As opposed to the past, our charge is now to do that in all phases of conflict, because there are now threats to those capabilities in the domain and out of the domain, and because they're so critical to those operations. We have to ensure now that they are provided across the spectrum of conflict and under threat. That means in many cases we have to defend and protect those capabilities. In other ways, we have to think differently about how we design our constellations and provide those services. And then finally, we have to recognize that potential adversaries will attempt to use similar capabilities to threaten our security interests and our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and we have to consider how we prevent them from doing that as well. So in a very short and easy statement, those are the priorities of the United States Space Force. They have been since our creation. And as General Lyles and Mr. Parikh said, we have been given significant resources over the years since we've been established to do exactly that. Again, Congress, both houses, both sides of the aisle, now 2 administrations have made that charge clear. They have given us enough latitude, enough direction, and enough resources to do that, and that's what we're focused on today. However, what I'd like to do with the rest of my time is I'd like to narrow up a little bit the discussion I'd like to have with you all. And it's going to be on one of the intersections of the Venn diagram that Chirag talked about, right? He talked about the Venn diagram of national security space, civil space, and commercial space. In terms of all the things the U.S. Space Force is doing in national security space, you know, we've just gone through the finalization of the 23 budget, and there's been a tremendous amount of discussion about the things the Space Force is doing, the things that national security space are doing. Here in early March, we anticipate the White House will deliver the 24 President's budget, and there will be more discussion about that, and a lot of discussion specifically related to military programs, Space Force programs, the things that we develop and field and operate inherent to the United States Space Force. What we don't talk about significantly and often enough, and I think in detail, is the relationship between the U.S. Space Force, between all of National Security Space Force, and the commercial sector. And in fact, I was happy to see that in your National Security Subcommittee, one of the specific foci is the specific relationship between national security space and the commercial sector. So for most of my time here this morning, before I ask, you know, offer up questions you may have for me, is I want to talk about how we use commercial space to support national security and U.S. Space Force and military objectives in kind of 3 buckets. The first is the way we use them today, which is generally an expansion of the way we've used them traditionally over the last several years and perhaps decades. The second is the way we are seeing what is truly an explosion of commercial services and capabilities that we're trying to leverage rapidly, perhaps not rapidly enough, but rapidly. That's kind of the second bucket. And then the third will be what we see as potential opportunities for the future. Not that we have specific plans today, not that perhaps the commercial sector isn't developed enough to be able to provide them as services, but I think areas that we can all consider and say, these are some places that perhaps we can go in the future in terms of the commercial sector, commercial services, and how we might use them to support national security aims. Okay. And like Chirag, actually I'm going to try.
Good luck.
I've got 32 font here. You know, I think I've got 32 fonts. So I'm going to try that, but I may be forced to
I'll hold it over here.
That's right. But there is no question that our prosperity and economic security are as vital an element of the nation's security as is defense. And certainly the national security space enterprise, the national security enterprise, and U.S. Space Force need to use commercial space capabilities directly in support of the nation's security. But we also firmly believe that there's an element of economic security in a strong and vibrant commercial space sector, not only because we can use it to the benefit of the nation, but because inherently in and of itself, there's value in a strong and vibrant commercial sector to support the economic security and the prosperity of the nation. Over the last 60 years, really what has happened in terms of space capabilities is the U.S. government has broadly invested in space capabilities for national security purposes and civil purposes. And my words, niche commercial capabilities have grown up, primarily, first of all, in communications, satellite communications in many ways, shape, or form, followed not too long thereafter for remote sensing and ISR and other types of needs. But what has really happened in the past few years is a tremendous explosion in commercial space services of other types, both commercial use of SATCOM and data relay and ISR, but others as well. And that has really driven a change in our perspective of how we need to think about the use of commercial space for national security purposes. Really, in the Space Force, we think about the use of the commercial sector in 2 ways. The first is the direct use of those commercial services to support our operations, our missions, and our activities, buying them as off-the-shelf services that we can use. That's the first. But there's a second and other important way, and that is the commercial sector is now also serving as an engine of innovation. And the technologies that they're developing, the new and innovative operating concepts, the way they are thinking about space also spurs us on to think about, can we use those technologies and operating concepts, perhaps not directly as commercial services, but perhaps we can adapt them to some of the military roles and missions that may not, while the direct use of services may not be applicable in the execution of a space mission, the idea, the technology, and the concepts can be applied for those national security purposes. So those are the two big reasons that we value and try to use commercial space. When you think about the benefits, though, there are a whole host of benefits and reasons we use it. The first is effective almost immediately. Use of commercial services can make our services and capabilities, the ways we conduct our roles and missions, more resilient, less vulnerable to attack, and therefore we can enhance deterrence against a nation that may, or an adversary that may seek to do us harm and start by attacking us in space. The second is we absolutely are a fan of the competition and the competitive pricing and cost relationship between commercial services, a large number of commercial services, and our need to use them. So that benefits us as well. Commercial services can provide surge capacity. In fact, for many years we have used commercial satellite communications to meet surge capacity needs for the Armed Forces Commercial Services. It gives us access, as I talked about here a little bit earlier, it gives us access to new and innovative technologies, but also allows us to rapidly update those technologies. One of the things that over the recent past we have become poor at in national security space, and I'll speak for the U.S. Space Force and not others, is it has taken us far too long to develop and field space systems. They're incredibly capable. They're still the best in the world, but we're falling behind in terms of our ability to rapidly refresh that technology, and the commercial market's helping us in that regard. And then finally, it has direct implications for diversification and health of the space industrial base. Even if we're not using services specifically, even if we're not using some of these technologies specifically, the fact that we can once again look to a much more vibrant and growing space industrial base helps us in other areas as well as we pursue the development and fielding of our commercial systems, our military systems. And so for all those reasons, that's why we value the commercial space sector. In fact, we have now adapted our approach to developing and fielding space systems. In the past, we looked very narrowly at a very specific mission set. We expected that we would buy and own and operate it, and it would be providing a very specific mission. With the creation of the Space Force, we've now adapted a new force design approach that is reflective of other services, and in fact are looking at an integrated approach to providing services and capabilities. We established an organization called the Space Warfighting Analysis Center, whose job is specifically to look at holistically mission sets. What are the requirements? What are the capabilities available? What can be provided and should be provided inherently by the U.S. Space Force? How can we partner with our other national security partners, primarily but not exclusively the National Reconnaissance Office? How can we partner with NASA in some areas of this? But as importantly, what's available in the commercial sector and how might that fit in? And we take that analysis and we look at performance, and we look at cost, and we look at resilience in the face of attack. And in the first instance of this activity, the Space Warfighting Analysis came up with 10,000 independent architectures with which to accomplish the first mission set that we looked at, which was missile warning and missile tracking. Ultimately, brought that down to about 120, and then did multiple Monte Carlo runs to look at those and variations of those in terms of cost, performance, and resilience. And that included how do we bring in commercial services? And so that's a new approach to providing resilient, capable services for the nation. So let me talk now just briefly about that first bucket. Better make sure I don't run out of time here. Well, you think about the commercial services we use today and we use in the past. Obviously, satellite communications. Traditional satellite communications that we've used for many, many, many years, a strong commercial sector in the past and even today that is primarily focused on high-capacity commercial services from geosynchronous orbit. I'll talk in the next bucket about how we're moving that, but for many, many years we use commercial services. We do that through a commercial SATCOM purchasing office that's assigned to Space Systems Command. They've got over 200 contracts. They've got contracts worth more than $6 billion that let us on demand in sort of a bring your money and buy your service, provide those capabilities to the Joint Force. The intelligence community for many years now has been purchasing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance data through both the National Reconnaissance Office and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. This allows them to, especially to provide broad and wide coverage for routine sorts of needs and focus their activities and their systems and their capabilities on very exquisite, very precise needs for the security of the nation and for the conduct of military operations and things like that. We have also for many years now used commercial services and data for space domain awareness, the ability to track those now 40,000 plus objects in space that the United States Space Force tracks every single day, tracks for safety of flight, tracks for hazards of collision, but also now increasingly tracks for the purposes of understanding whether there are threats and how they might threaten commercial, civil, and of course our own space capabilities. This is primarily through data buys to date. In fact, U.S. Space Command has a cell out in Colorado Springs, Colorado, that is specifically focused on the purchase of commercial data and using that commercial data for our needs in terms of understanding the domain, looking for threats, and clearing our high-value satellites of any suspicious objects or specific activity in the realm of those sorts of things. And then finally, space launch services. For years, for decades in fact, the United States Air Force first and now the United States Space Force was the primary provider of launch services for the nation. Our partner in that was NASA. NASA primarily focused on specific systems that supported human spaceflight, and we helped them not only with our national security payloads, but with other research and exploratory payloads that were not crewed systems. However, it really started now 20 plus years ago with the first evolved expendable launch vehicle program, an opening of the commercial market such that today I think we're on the verge of perhaps another round of explosion in the availability of commercial launch services. And so we've used commercial launch services to some extent, both for our most important national security payloads through our National Security Space Launch Program. We have 2 qualified, highly capable, highly sophisticated launch providers for our most sensitive and most capable payloads. But through a couple of other programs, we've looked at introducing smaller companies, smaller rockets, suborbital flights, to be able to basically use those services, but also stimulate that aspect of the market. And so that's kind of the commercial services we use today. Very quickly, where we're going here immediately with the explosion of commercial services is continued use of SATCOM, but I would add to that space data relay and space data transport. And in many ways, we have to be careful. In some ways, satellite communications and space data relay are similar, but in some ways they're different, and we're certainly looking at them both similarly and differently in the movement of data globally. And as you think about how increasingly the armed forces needs global flow of information and flow quickly, we will do it through mesh networks of both military and nationally provided and commercial services, mesh networks in low Earth orbit to provide data transport. Our Space Development Agency is pursuing a national military capability to do that, but it will certainly be integrated with and partnered with commercial services to provide capacity and to provide resilience. The next is an expansion of non-traditional commercial ISR. In the past, it's been primarily imagery. We now have folks that survey the RF spectrum. There are a whole host of ways in which commercial services are exploding with respect to ISR. The intelligence community continues to work on how to provide those services. We are also now placing an increased demand signal on them from the Space Force in support of combat commanders who increasingly understand what their needs are, how to get them met, and met both by U.S. national government systems, but also the opportunity to provide them through commercial services as well. Satellite command and control, right? For years, and in fact today, the U.S. Space Force operates a satellite control network. The NRO operates a satellite control network. There are others, including NASA, that have their own networks for satellite command and control. There's also actually a tremendous capacity in the commercial sector for Earth stations and Earth terminals and satellite command and control. We in the Department of Defense can use them, again, to increase our resilience, increase our capacity, and frankly, potentially give us access geographically in areas that perhaps we don't have direct access to, but as a result of basing and other things. Absolutely, expansion of use of launch. Rapid, reliable, low-cost launch. In fact, I'm especially proud, perhaps some of you have been following the release of the strategy for the next phase of national security space launch, which does two things. Preserves that vital, inherent need for responsive but reliable, high-quality launch for our most sensitive and most important national security payloads, but also providing an on-ramp for future folks who can come in and demonstrate they can provide at reasonable cost the quality and the services we need to add them into the mix as well. The team in the Space Force has spent a lot of time and in cases with some of you looking to do that. And I'm really pleased by the way they balance both the need to continue what we've been doing for decades with great, great success, as well as an opportunity to leverage more and more of that commercial market. And then finally, in-space servicing. What a great opportunity there. As you all know, most satellites these days are limited by consumables, failures of equipment, the inability to maneuver in space. 2 years ago, we put out a request for services document. Rather than in-space servicing developed, fielded, and operated by the United States Space Force, we have made it very clear that in-space servicing need will be met by the commercial market, and we've sent that demand signal out there. And that's one, and really that's for us. We will use those services as soon as they are broadly available, and that's growing. And so that's sort of the second the bucket. And then let me just briefly, I think I'm about out of time. Let me just talk briefly about what we hope to do further in the future. The first is an expansion of that in-space servicing to include manufacturing, supply, and other things. A lot of work to do on what those concepts look like, what is capable, but we know that is a growing area that especially supports pushing out further into the solar system and perhaps maybe more commercial and exploratory purposes today. But as soon as it's there, as soon as we understand it more, we expect to leverage it. We're also looking for advanced technologies like nuclear propulsion and power. That may or may not be commercially provided. It may be provided through the national security enterprise, but we're certainly ready to take advantage of that. And then finally, space debris mitigation and removal. We have an innovative arm of the Space Force and Air Force called SpaceWorks, where we're trying to marry venture capital and entrepreneurs and innovators together. We put $10 million towards an idea that says, show us ways to clean up the environment. And we'll take anything from LEO to GEO. We'll take anything from small bits all the way up to old dead satellites. We're just looking for innovative ways to help us and the nation be good stewards of the environment. And if it leads to a commercial service or commercial capability someday, we will be excited about that. I think I'm going to stop there to entertain any questions you might have, but really, that's where we are today in terms of commercial services. We absolutely believe they're vital for us militarily, but also vital for the economic security and prosperity of the nation. We're moving out rapidly to adopt them, frankly, never rapidly enough. But I think that the vast majority of the force now understands what's available in the commercial market and are increasingly understanding how best to use it for our purposes and for the security and prosperity of the nation. Thank you.
D.T., thank you very, very much. There's sort of good news and bad news when groups like this. One, we get a chance to hear from leaders like you and what you're doing, and I mean that sincerely. You and Salty, and before you, Jay, have just done. It's amazing the things you've done with the Space Force in just a very, very couple of years. The bad thing is that we don't have enough time to get into everything. I dare say, literally every sentence you said generates questions and comments from an audience like this. I saw people nodding heads, et cetera. So in the interest of time, unfortunately, we won't be able to do that. But the ability to use our National Security Subcommittee, perhaps augmented by others who have vital interest in almost everything that you touched on, I look forward to an opportunity. You and Salty have already agreed to entertain us in the Pentagon in your SCIF facilities. We will make sure we get you some of the questions ahead of time so to cover them. And that's, I will survey each one of us and the kind of things we should address, because it's just a wonderful list of things that need to be explored and we want to explore. I will set the stage with one thing, though, that's to think about. You talked about commercial services, which I think we all we resonate with and agree to. There's this sort of words in the hidden beginning of the Space Force to also look at commercial practices on how we do business, how you contract, how you develop, how you acquire, how you even establish requirements. You touched upon that, about doing things in a more speedy manner. And if you look at the small language for the creation of the Space Force, it's not only to use those to figure out how to do them better through the Space Force, but also take those lessons learned to the rest of the Pentagon writ large. And so that's a subject I'd love for you to and Salty to address when we come over, and how you're doing that particular area. And let me just stop right there.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And I would say we're seeing some success in other areas, but it's that expanding more broadly that we're facing the challenge with.
Great.
But absolutely, personally, and General Saltzman and all of us support the work of this group and are ready as the subcommittee's engaged for further conversation and discussion.
DT, thank you very much. One other area that I know you're doing that obviously we all have interest in, particularly Mandy, programs that you're doing with education and outreach. Your university partnership program is really brand new for the Department of Defense, and it really is a winner. So we definitely want to touch on how you're doing outreach, particularly in STEM and things like that. So lots to come.
Yes, sir. And in fact, several members of this group lead universities that are working with us, and
yes,
and we're all learning in that area too. So.
Great. DT, thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here. Please join me. Okay, I realize I violated my first rule by not giving you a chance to ask questions, but I think you can see in the interest of time, we're going to have similar opportunities, and if you will, generate lots of things from the other speakers this morning. And I will make sure we get some of your thoughts on things we should address with the Space Force when we get a chance to go over there. I will invite as many of you, even if you're not part of the National Security Subcommittee, to join us if you can do that. We'll do it in a SCIF. Kathy, the last time we had the opportunity to do this under Jay Raymond, we had, I think, a robust group, and we did it in a SCIF, and it was very, very eye-opening to hear not only what's going on organizationally, but to hear the classified things that they're doing and are planning. So we will plan that accordingly. Again, already got the thumbs up from General Saltzman. It's just a matter of finding a time that's convenient for all. It might take 2 or 3 times, to be honest with you. So, well, very, very honored as our next speaker, somebody in some respects I work for, and that's Colonel Pam Milroy, the Deputy Administrator of NASA. Pam has been so gracious to join us. She joined us a little bit for last night for a while, and there, I don't need to say, lots and lots of exciting things going on with NASA. So without any further ado, Pam, welcome, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, General Lyles, Chirac, JJ, for inviting me here on behalf of Administrator Bill Nelson and our Associate Administrator Bob Cabana. I'm really proud to be here. I also want to thank each and every one of you, having been a prior UAG member, for the dedication and commitment that you are showing by volunteering your time for something that is so important to our country. Before I begin, I'd actually like to show you a brief video, which hopefully is a powerful and compelling story about some of the work we're doing at NASA now. So if you can roll the video for me, please. Thank you.
We're never going to stop exploring the unknown in air and space. We're not going to stop innovating for the benefit of humanity and inspiring the world. through discovery. 22 will go down in the history books as one of the most accomplished years all of NASA's history and missions. The golden age of space exploration. So much to look forward to in 23. Climate missions that will tell us about how our Earth is changing. Game-changing aeronautics developments with the 59 and the X-57, and the selection of the first astronauts to go to the moon in more than 50 years. And there's a lot more coming. There was a philosopher, a historian, someone who had a great grasp of the future named Carl Sagan, a scientist. And he said, exploration is in our nature. We began as wanderers, and we are wanderers still. We have lingered long enough on the shores of the cosmic ocean. We are ready at last to set sail for the stars. We have set sail for the stars. Now we're going to reach out to the unreachable stars.
Thank you. Indeed, we are proud of 2022 and what we'll accomplish in 2023. Today, I'm going to focus on the strong and important role that civil space plays in innovation and highlight a few critical areas. There's so much to talk about, but I'm going to try to focus on a few things that are rapidly changing and creating impact that we particularly look forward to engaging with the UAG on. In echoing a theme that has gone before me, commercial activity, climate research, and our Moon to Mars strategy. So Chirag talked about the Venn diagram. Let's see if I can, well, I'm not able to advance the slide, or there we go. The Venn diagram between civil, commercial, and national security space. Well, we have our own Venn diagram. And this is the benefits of civil space to humanity. And I'll start out with the first, which is science. Science is front and center for NASA. It's a critical capability. Our investigations that can only be done in the space environment, whether it's providing the microgravity exposure, understanding the human body, combustion, fluid dynamics, but also to explore our solar system, to see the history of the Earth, and as a part of the solar system, to look from space at our changing Earth and its climate, and of course to understand the cosmos and the role that the development of the cosmos has played. So science is our seed corn. It is the seed corn of future capabilities, and you'll hear a lot more about that from our former Associate Administrator for Science, Thomas Zurbuchen, who will be addressing you shortly. The second area, let's see if I can, I'm having trouble with the clicker. There we go, thank you. The second area is national posture, and to echo Buzz Aldrin's comments about doing things because they are hard. That brings tremendous technical and science capability to a country that can be leveraged in other ways. One of my favorite examples of that actually is the fact that software engineering as a discipline essentially didn't exist before Apollo. It had to be created in order to achieve Apollo. And there are many, many examples of that where the technology capabilities that we develop in doing the incredibly hard things that we do to go to space spin off into other areas. And increasingly, with the explosive growth in our commercial space industry, it is having enormous economic impact for our country as well. The third area is inspiration. Next slide, please. Thank you. And of course, those incredible pictures from the James Webb Space Telescope that give us a sense of our place in humanity and provide tremendous inspiration around the world. But very importantly, it also inspires students to study STEM. Just like science is the seed corn of capabilities, our students are the seed corn of the future for our country as well. We are laser focused on making sure that when we build strategies and undertake activities, that all three of these areas are being addressed so that we can maximize the value of NASA to the American people. Next slide, please. I'd like to start out by talking about ISS. So we all know that it takes the government to do really big things in space that no single company or even an industry would be willing to take on for themselves. And more than 2 decades ago, NASA partnered with our international partners to develop the space station. And that work is for the benefit of all. It's an investment whose payoff is advancing technology, improving life on Earth, and ensuring our peaceful path further into the solar system. And now we have more than 22 years of continued human occupancy on orbit. We learned from the tantalizing science that we got flying the space shuttle 6 or 7 times a year that there was so much to be learned from microgravity science. But flying the shuttle just a few times a year was not enough. We needed a platform that could do science 24/7, 365 days a year. Additionally, the ISS was the first major civil space program in human spaceflight that was, by design, an international partnership where we could share data but also achieve more together than we could alone. And it's been a spectacular success in that area. The ISS gave us a platform, yes, to do incredible microgravity research, but it also enabled us to learn how to work and do science and go to space together with our international partners. Excitingly, the National Academies is now working on their second decadal survey for microgravity research, which just shows you how much more science there is that remains. We also believe much of the science that is performed on the space station is going to help guide our exploration further into the solar system. We've also opened the station for research to enable commercial and marketing opportunities to expand its utilization and its impact. Since making these opportunities available, there's been a growing demand from both traditional and novel industries demonstrating the benefits of the space station to help catalyze and expand the use of space and space exploration markets in the low Earth orbit economy. Operating the station through 2030 is absolutely critical to us, and it is critical to our international partners. We need it to prepare not just for future exploration, which is a very important aspect of the science that's being done, but also to continue to nurture and support a growing commercial low Earth orbit economy. The ISS has demonstrated what happens when the government invests in something that seemed impossible more than 2 decades ago. And we've shown what we can do when the nations who are our partners work together. Next slide, please. Which brings me to commercialization. In addition to the incredible capabilities in science that support exploration, the ISS has had a transformational impact no one could have imagined 30 years ago when it was first being formulated as a program. As NASA approached the retirement of the space shuttle, there was a need to continue to supply the ISS. The commercial cargo program ignited a revolution in commercial space. First, we incentivized low-cost access to space by promising and paying for a regular and sustained manifest of launches. Second, we created a lower-cost destination for science and small satellites to launch from the ISS. And the combination of those two things has spurred innovation and made our commercial space industry the envy of the world. When that big picture investment by the government helped to prove a business model, industry literally grew exponentially. And then we did it again with Commercial Crew. As of 2020, the U.S. is launching its astronauts from U.S. soil again, and we'll all be rooting for the very next flight, Crew 6, which launches this weekend, along with international partners. We're extremely proud of our role in supporting commercial cargo and crew that has shown how government and industry can work together, letting industry make its own calls on how to carry out the mission and resulting in a capability that many can now utilize, including national security, as General Thompson mentioned. NASA's partnership with American private industry is changing the arc of spaceflight history by opening access to more people, more science, and more commercial opportunities. And now will enable a seamless transition of capabilities in low Earth orbit to one or more commercially owned and operated destinations in the late 2020s. We learned a lot from the Commercial Crew and cargo model, and 4 companies are now studying and developing their own commercial space stations and commercial nodes on the ISS to provide access to private and government customers, and we're helping them. All of this increases access to space for industry and for other nations, for academia, for students, and for scientists worldwide. I want to point out that this is not to say that there are not some challenges here. We are very well aware that the lack of an agency with on-orbit authority to act as a regulator is a future barrier to commercial low Earth orbit space stations. We are not a regulator. That is not our role. Although we can provide technical assistance, and we do, we cannot be responsible for all activities on a commercial space station. And I hope the UAG will take an active interest in this issue. Next slide, please. The next critical area for NASA is the most pressing issue of our day, climate change. As NASA Administrator Bill Nelson frequently points out, NASA is not just an air and space agency. We are actually a climate agency. We're in a unique position because of our fleet of 26 missions, satellites as well as instruments aboard the International Space Station that collect data from polar regions, the deep seas, within our planet, and the highest reaches of our atmosphere. NASA's Earth Science Fleet measures the height of oceans and inland waters, clouds and precipitation, soil moisture, carbon dioxide, methane, and many, many more things. These observations drive our scientific understanding of Earth as a system, and scientists worldwide have open access to NASA data to tackle some of the biggest questions about how our planet is changing now and how it could change in the future. NASA also develops new ways to observe, study, and use decades of data records to build predictive models of Earth's interconnected climate systems. And our expertise in space and scientific exploration contributes to essential services provided to the American people by other federal agencies, such as weather forecasting and natural resource management. All of this Earth science enables policymakers, government agencies, and other stakeholders to make more informed decisions on critical issues that occur all around the world. Administrator Nelson recently announced NASA's Earth Information Center to leverage NASA's data and modeling capabilities to work with other government and community partners with longstanding engagement specifically in communities most affected by climate change. This center will give the world access to our planet like never before, with resources, user-friendly information, and data that can be used immediately by everyday people and decision makers. NASA's next generation of remote sensing is the Earth System Observatory. It is a suite of missions designed to work together to accelerate our ability to guide efforts related to climate change, disaster mitigation, managing wildland fires, and improving real-time agricultural processes. Each satellite mission will be uniquely designed to complement each other, working in tandem to create a 3D holistic view of Earth from bedrock to atmosphere. How cool is that? But this is actually not just about observing the Earth from space. I also just want to highlight the work that our Aeronautics Mission Directorate is doing. They have a full complement of work in helping the aviation industry achieve the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, long-term aspirational goal of net zero carbon dioxide emissions from aviation by 2050. Aviation is one of the hardest industries to decarbonize, and our aeronautics portfolio is uniquely positioned to make a major impact in this area. And we look forward to working with the UAG in climate as well. Next slide, please. I hope you all had the opportunity to experience either live or virtually the launch of Artemis 1 on November 16th, as we are poised to leverage this incredible capability that we have spent more than a decade developing for the U.S. The focus of this administration was to craft a Moon to Mars strategy to guide the nation for the future. Next slide, please. You can boil our strategy down to a simple and incredibly lofty goal: to create a blueprint for sustained human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. Just as we learned that we needed a sustained presence in space to optimize science for microgravity research, we understand that humans need to go and to stay to have all the benefits that we hope to get out of our Venn diagram: science, capabilities, and inspiration. A group of NASA leaders from across our agency came together to develop guideposts across a range of vital areas to establish a long-term human presence at the moon and then move deeper into the solar system. Next slide, please. After workshops with industry and international partners and inputs from the public and the NASA workforce, we now have strong consensus on 63 objectives, starting front and center with science. I just want to emphasize what a huge difference this is for our exploration program than Apollo was. Science is front and center in what we are doing in Artemis. Next slide. Of course, transportation and habitation, a unique area of expertise for NASA that we will continue to leverage with the SLS rocket, the Orion spacecraft, and our other capabilities. Next slide, please. Infrastructure. If we're going to have a sustained presence, it's one thing to take a short trip to the moon and spend 30 days doing science. But if we're going deeper into the solar system, we really need to have the infrastructure that enables humans to stay for longer periods of time. And infrastructure will be absolutely key to that. Next slide, please. And finally, operations. When we flew the space shuttle on short duration missions, we accomplished our operations in a specific way. We had to transition the way we operate when we went to the International Space Station. And we're going to have to revolutionize our operations again as we use human-machine teaming and a combination of short-duration missions and longer-duration stays to really understand how we're going to operate throughout the solar system. We recently conducted an architecture concept review to begin to flow the objectives in each of these 4 areas into our architecture to ensure that we're preparing ourselves for our ambitious goals. There is a huge amount of work being done inside NASA on this, but it's our intent to engage the UAG to discuss the output of that review and especially the assumptions and trades that went into our architecture later this year. We really look forward to your advice and input. Next slide, please. The lessons learned from the moon will help us get to Mars and beyond. Even as we do experiments today on propulsion, communications, and other technologies that will be critical for humans on the lunar surface, they will make missions to Mars possible and longer-term exploration of the solar system and, yes, the universe after that. We have to think generationally. Human missions to the moon and missions to Mars after that will be taking place over the next 20 years. And similarly, our flagship science missions, such as James Webb Space Telescope, encompass many years from development to flight to results. Today, I just barely scratched the surface of what's happening at NASA. There's a huge amount of exciting work ahead for the agency. Once again, I want to thank each and every one of you. I deeply, personally appreciate your commitment to serving on the UAG. I believe that we're at a pivot point. As the administrator said, we're at the golden age of space exploration. Many people might look back at the Apollo landings as the golden age, but in fact, we think the element of commercial space and the fact that it will proliferate out to benefit society looks a little bit more like the golden age of aviation, where the government made significant investments higher, faster, further, that rapidly spun out into commercial capabilities, building the commercial aviation industry that we know and rely on, and many industries rely on every day. This is an era of change and innovation. NASA is very proud of our role in leading it, and we look forward to your thoughtful engagement and advice. Thank you.
Pam, thank you very much. As always, and just like our previous speaker, everything you said was very, very exciting, and it really could generate thousands of questions and comments from this particular audience. In the interest of time, I will take a couple of questions, and I'm going to be very democratic about this. I'm going to take one question from the left-hand side, one from the right-hand side. And so let's see. Lance, you're going to lead the Exploration and Discovery Subcommittee. Comments?
I'm going to need like a couple hours with Pam. That's what I need. Well, I appreciate that you brought up commercial and science, and just a preface that those are areas of interest that we're very deeply interested in looking at and recognize. Also, it was great that the previous speaker talked about commercial as well in national security. So there's a lot of intertwined issues here, and we will need to probably have some more information and dialogue from you and your team. So nothing substantial at this point. I'm afraid I might go right down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and also want to acknowledge, just especially because Charlie is here, the role that previous administrations have played in those decisions that encouraged commercial. It's actually been through a couple of administrations, and along the lines of the left and the right side of the table, civil space is bipartisan. It's something that we have to invest in, like defense and foreign policy. It's something that really needs to be focused on for a long period of time. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Pam. I was going to mention Charlie also, because you're right. He's literally a founder of commercial space activity. Charlie, thank you very much. And on the right side, Dan Hastings.
Yeah, so Pam, thank you very much. You mentioned that the UAG would have a role in reviewing the architectures. So, I mean, how do you see that actually happening? You'll have a meeting of this group and present to everybody, or you want one of the subcommittees to take it up, or?
I think we should have a conversation about that. Obviously I have opinions, Dan, having chaired the committee that you're chairing now.
I suspect
I do think that there was a lot of benefit in having the subcommittee meetings first. Very frank and open dialogue. I can tell you that communications is actually a critical part of our Moon to Mars strategy. We understand that we need to consult. And so we consulted industry, we consulted the American people, we consulted our international partners to make sure that we were, really looking at these objectives in the right light, and they made a huge difference. In addition to that, I've asked the Exploration Systems Directorate to provide the supporting documentation around the decisions that were made, in particular some white papers around key trades and decisions. You know, there's so many stakeholders in this area. You can talk, there's a very large dynamic range, but we would like to get into it with you guys on some of those key trades. Are we making the right trades? Have we missed anything? And in particular, are we really focused on that Venn diagram that I talked about? Are we appropriately balancing national capability, science, and inspiration? And are we hitting the target in all three of those areas? So I'd look forward to talking to you about that. Of course, happy to then take it to the broader team. So.
Great. And Dan, I might just add, I happen to have chaired that subcommittee in the last UAG. Exactly as Pam said, we looked at and had a chance to talk to all the architects, make sure we looked at every alternative, what the analysis was at NASA to make sure we answered the question. Is it really all-encompassing? Is the Venn diagram really being realized? Did they talk to everybody? Do they understand and look at every potential opportunity and option to create the current lunar and Mars architecture? I will say, I've said this to some of you, nirvana for my turn in looking at that from the last UAG was a session we had with Jim Bridenstine at the time at NASA headquarters, where we spent a day reviewing everything. And nirvana to me was one of our subcommittee members was on the line listening. His name happened to be Buzz Aldrin, and Buzz at the end said, "Yay, verily, that was right." So that when we got that from Buzz, we knew we had won. So we'll make sure we do the same sort of things here. Okay, Pam, thank you very, very much. Well, I might be remiss if I didn't say also, in addition to acknowledging the great, great leadership and really the background, if you will, for a lot of things that Pam said that Charlie Bowden was responsible for. I think, Cyan, was that you in the picture of the private air mission? Were you were not in that particular one?
No, that was Axiom 1, but the Inspiration 4 mission was proud to be a part of the advancement of human spaceflight.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our third sort of scene-setting topic, and it's commercial space priorities. And we're blessed to have Dr. Richard Del Bello, the Director of the Office of Space Commerce at NOAA. And Rich, thank you very much for being with us, and we're looking forward to hearing your comments.
It is a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much. Greetings from Secretary Raimondo and Deputy Secretary Don Graves, who send their best wishes and commitment of support to the work of the group. It's amazing. I feel like my work has already been done for me between the comments of General Thompson and Deputy Administrator Melroy. The commercial is obviously top of mind for a lot of our space leadership. So the Office of Space Commerce is a little office within the Department of Commerce. We have three fundamental responsibilities. Since the late 1980s, we've been a consistent advocate for space policies, space regulation, and support for the industry. We are also a regulator. We regulate the Earth remote sensing industry. And depending on how the dialogues go in the future, which I defer to my colleague on my right, we may have a few more responsibilities ahead of us. And third, as a result of Space Policy Directive 3, we are implementing a space tracking system to take over the responsibility for civil and commercial SSA for tracking space objects from the Defense Department. Defense Department isn't going away. They have other, as General Thompson said, they have other responsibilities. They'll still be deeply engaged. We have a great relationship with them that's working well. But we are beginning now the acquisition cycle to create a separate standalone SSA system at the Department of Commerce. Just a couple of quick highlights on commercial space. We've had the Bureau of Economic Analysis looking at these issues. So we're tracking over nearly 2,000 startups, raising more than $250 billion in equity for startup space. We believe that in 2019 alone, there were over 350,000 private sector jobs associated with commercial space, with contributing over $120 billion to the GDP. All that activity has resulted in a tripling of active spacecraft in orbit, which obviously, and we'll talk about later, creates both great opportunities and great challenges. The U.S. commercial space industry is greatly admired. Globally, we do get a lot of questions and comments about how the U.S. did what we did. That has been covered a little bit by both General Thompson and Deputy Administrator Melroy, but just to sort of recap, certainly it's not magic, it's hard work that did it. First of all, we start with the fundamentals. The United States has stable and sensible laws that are backed up by predictable courts. We have a culture, we've nurtured a culture of entrepreneurship in technology. We have abundant and accessible risk capital, and really importantly, we have an education system that continues to produce a deep reservoir of talented engineers, scientists, business people. But that's not all. We've also, as Pam mentioned, had over 40 years of bipartisan support for the concept of encouraging commercial space. That is a unique occurrence in Washington, D.C. And I think the agencies have been wonderfully creative in how they've implemented that support, and particularly with tipping our hat to NASA, which has really led the way on really recreating the contractor-government relationship through the amazing programs of commercial cargo, commercial crew, and now the commercial LEO destination program, the CLD program. So really kudos to my government colleagues. Last night I had an opportunity to talk to several of you about what I should do today, and uniformly everyone said, oh God, please don't give us a long speech. Why don't you just talk to us about what your actual problems are? So, Mr. Chairman, at the risk of turning this into a therapy session about me, I'd like to talk about the things that keep me up at night. The 5 challenges. First challenge is purely technical. There's just some fundamental things that we don't do very well. Today, SSA is pretty good. It's not uniformly excellent. This means that the government is sending out a lot of warnings to industry that get ignored. Imagine, if you will, you're flying into O'Hare, crowded Monday afternoon, and you hear the air traffic controller say, United 555, looks like American 322 is in your flight path. You might want to keep your eyes open. Over. That would be unsettling, I think. That is approximately what we do with SSA today. So we need to be able to speak with the same confidence in SSA that we speak with air traffic control. And we're a long way from that. That this is a journey, and I think we just have to recognize. I find that there are many analogies people like to use. I find the air traffic control is the one I prefer, because early on in the industry there were no rules. There definitely wasn't no air traffic control, and it took us 100 years, but we've got a pretty amazing system in place right now. And so we just have to be we have to be patient with ourselves and know we're not there yet, but know that it's a journey we need to take. The second issue General Thompson touched on is space debris. Truthfully, there are no great ideas today on how to solve overall the debris problem that we have with large debris and small debris. That doesn't mean we should stop trying, and there are a lot of great initiatives underway. But just to say, well, where are we in that journey? If somebody made a major mess in space, we don't have any way to clean it up. And so, again, we're at the beginning of a long technical journey. The second anxiety point that I have is purely international. China is a major space player and will be a major space player. They are not participating in the global dialogue and global information sharing on SSA. That's unsustainable. The current way of communicating with China, which is by email and occasionally tersely written demarches, is comically insufficient. And so, major problem, whatever our problems are with China, just as we wouldn't let a Chinese airline land at JFK without some kind of communication on air traffic control, we have to find a path forward with them. The other international issue is the Europeans are standing up a separate SSA system. I suspect we'll see many other countries do the same. That means operators can choose who they get their information from. So we're going to live in a world where you as a satellite operator probably will have 2 or 3 or 4 different choices. From our perspective, that's slightly terrifying to me. You've got different sensors with different biases, do it using different and running on different analytics, producing different results, and I don't know how to compare any of that yet. And that is a technical challenge, but also a political challenge. We need nations of the world to, I acknowledge the right of other nations to, that they want to have an SSA system. I acknowledge their right to do that, but we also have a responsibility to figure out how we're going to talk to each other to make this make sense. Challenge 3 is a personal business and policy challenge. We've been asked to implement an SSA system, but because the current system isn't meeting all the needs of the commercial sector, we have a whole commercial industry that's sprung up and is providing additional services. And so the challenge part of the challenge to the Department of Commerce is how do we come into this marketplace and not disrupt it entirely? Because when the government enters the marketplace as a principal buyer, we have a hugely disruptive impact on the marketplace. And so that is a challenge we're struggling with now. We are trying to be as open and transparent as we can. We just recently released an RFI on what we thought are basic services. We said we think we're going to do these things. We're not going to do those things. If you agree, if you think we're doing too much, if you're thinking we're doing too little. So that just closed, so I think we're probably going to get the answers back next week, I think, from industry. We're looking forward to hearing what industry has to say. We're also running pilots. We just completed a pilot in GEO using all commercial data, no government data. And we expect when we analyze the data, we're going to see at least at GEO, LEO being a completely much more complicated problem, we think at GEO we're going to see that the commercial sector has amazing capabilities. So, fourth challenge, regulatory. It's been mentioned already. We have a lot of new activities, refueling, manufacturing in space, commercial LEO destinations, mining on the moon. We have a bunch of stuff coming at us. We're not really yet poised to, the regulatory regime isn't really set up to handle all that yet. And so we have a near-term problem, long-term problem. I think the near-term problem is who's going to be responsible for managing these new technologies as they come along. And I know the Space Council is deeply engaged on that. And I think there's also a long-term issue, which is as the United States, I think we need to ask ourselves, how can we reimagine regulation a generation from now? Not for tomorrow, not for next year, but in a generation with all the tools and technology we have. How do we take the current process, which is kind of archaic? You know, if you're an entrepreneur, you come to Washington, you hire some Beltway bandits, you go talk to people, and they at first it's completely incomprehensible, then slowly you sort of get it, and then you hire people to do that because you don't want to do it anymore. And I'm just saying, can we do better? I think the answer should be yes. But I think that would be I would love to work with you all on that challenge. And then finally, challenge 5, we need to work on the development of I call it a concept of operator responsibility. So we are slowly adding new rules. Again, if you look at what happened in the aviation industry, and both in manufacturing and in operations, the slow accretion of rules, we are slowly moving out on things like safety, debris mitigation, adherence to best manufacturing practices, the overall rubric of sustainability. The FCC, kudos to the FCC, has done some really forward-leaning work on debris and on failures and constellations. But we really haven't had a whole of government really deep think about where we want to go on this. Also, in my narrow area, it was a little bit alarming to learn that not all operators know where their stuff is. So there's a difference in competence in flight for spacecraft, with obviously the more established and older companies having the more sophisticated flight dynamics teams, and younger companies maybe less so. And also the idea of everyone was enthusiastic, I can launch a CubeSat, but I think we're coming to the point now in our history where perhaps throwing CubeSats into space that don't have any propulsion or guidance and no way to communicate effectively, maybe that deserves some rethinking. So changing our behaviors, a new concept of operator responsibility, new rules, new regulations. Again, a long journey. We're at the very beginning of it, and I look forward to working with you all on any or all of these complicated topics.
I have a quick question. It's a pet peeve of mine.
Charlie, can you make sure you talk to the mic?
Oh, okay. Kind of a pet peeve. Can we, or can the Department of Commerce or somebody do something to get rid of the term democratization of space? Because for one thing, I have no idea what that means when you have the greatest democracy in the world that's kind of running space right now, and we've opened it up to commercial entities that have brought you your 5 nightmares. How much more democratic can we make space? I think it's a useless term that confuses people and causes us not to work together frequently, because we feel that NASA's antiquated and obsolete. We can go do it on our own, and that's kind of what you were talking about when you talk about regulation and the like. That's semi-question, but it's also a peeve.
Okay, well, I'm not democratizing anything. I'm just trying to figure out how we have all of our domestic problems have all of our domestic regulatory and technology development issues have an international dimension. I mean, I think it was mentioned earlier by Mr. Chairman about this is an international business. And so I think of all those together. And we have a leadership role to play, and I think the government has played and will continue to play the most fundamental role in leadership.
Lance, and then I'll entertain any other questions.
Thank you, Richard. I do want to say that we're glad to hear. I was glad to hear what you presented, regardless of the fact that it's not helping you sleep. But because our committee, I'll let you know that our committee, one of the big things we identified in this commercial world is a need for regulation. It's refreshing to know that there, usually we associate an industry perspective of not wanting to be regulated, but these our members said, we need to have guidelines and a playing field and protections, and it will help perpetuate in a lot of the things you pointed out. So we are, later today, I'll present that we're aligned with you, so we look forward to working with you and whoever else we can to help make that happen. In the meantime, I do suggest you go get some therapy.
Well, on the point of regulation, I always want to be careful, because I think there are, regulation is a very loaded word in Washington, and I know that I try to stay in touch with my colleagues on the Hill, and I know that any solution to all these problems is going to involve the United States Congress. So I want to always say, when we think regulation, we always think light touch. We always think, what's the minimum we can do to meet the government's requirements? And if we don't need regulation, then we shouldn't be regulating. There are also best practices, there's standards, there's a lot of other ways we can go, and I think we need to keep the full toolkit on the table, knowing that if we drive industry away with excessive regulations, there's a whole world that they can go play in. They can register their space systems pretty much anywhere they want. So we are very much in the mindset of, we need to be mindful that we need to move the needle a little bit on coordination. How do we do that? Regulation is the word we use, but it's highly charged. So we're mindful of that.
Katrina?
On behalf of the students that I teach, they're middle schoolers. And so you called it space debris. They said space junk. And I want to make sure that they get their voices heard. So I have a series of questions I'd love to share with you on their solutions for dealing with space junk.
That's very good. Anxious to hear that myself. Good, thank you. Other quick questions? Well, Rich, again, this is a target-rich environment of so many things that need to be addressed, and you certainly have a very exciting and passionate audience as part of the UAG, and we look forward to working with you and helping, well, maybe to increase your nightmares, but also to decrease them. I think we can do that.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks. Well, our last presenter for this morning represents the sort of science and technology sector. We're honored to have Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, the former Associate Administrator for Science Mission Directorate at NASA. And Thomas was gracious enough to join us to give us sort of space science priorities and perspectives. So, Thomas, thank you.
Well, really appreciate, General. Thanks, everybody, for setting this up. You should know that yesterday in Park City, there were 23 inches of fresh snow. So you see how much I care about this organization. The other thing I want to say is how honored I am that I can speak in the same session as, Colonel Melroy. She's one of the people I miss every day working with, and I'm really glad that she's here. So if there's an official NASA question, she can take over from me, because as you know, I'm sitting here as Private Citizen Z. Thomas, with experience that I'm really excited to have had in the last 6+ years, kind of having the honor of running the top science program, doing science in and from space in the world. And a program that is really the envy of everybody who's doing science because of its great impact that it has, the inspiration that it projects, and frankly, the motivation it gives for us to really appreciate our beautiful planet and also the universe as a whole, and kind of tell us more beauty about it as we go forward. So the next slide is just giving you a context. That's the wrong slide deck. I submitted a longer slide deck, and I want to give shorter comments. By the way, I do know how to ski, and sometimes I get stuck in the snow, as you see in the top left. But that's about 23 inches. So it's the wrong slide deck. You need to get the shorter one. I'll just keep talking, so I don't in any way kind of stop you. We celebrated. What I did is I looked at the news last week, and I just want to tell you a couple of the news items that were out there. And of course, the first one is that we celebrated the 2-year anniversary of Perseverance on Mars, and that mission, which of course was launched by you and your team in the middle of COVID, kind of before any of the vaccines were available. That mission has achieved 3 major goals. So the first one is we have successfully deposited a full set of samples, really a collection of samples on the surface of Mars, ready to be picked up and returned to Earth as the first round trip of humanity to another planet. This collection of samples is informed by the best instruments ever built on the surface of Mars, looking at remote sensing of the environment. And we've learned a lot about Jezero Crater, and we know that it was well worth taking the risk of landing in that most hazardous place. I remember making that selection of that place, like, well, why is it always the most risky place that is the best science? And of course, the third thing is that we've proven a number of technologies, human explorers that will go to Mars will now have available landing technology, terrain relative navigation that we proved successfully that saved Perseverance and flew out of a dune field, which we would otherwise would have hit. We also, of course, have technology now that can generate oxygen from the CO2 of atmosphere with the MOXIE instrument. And the third piece is human explorers on the surface of Mars can have a robotic drone that is kind of supporting them through recon using the kind of technology of the Ingenuity helicopter. A helicopter that has flown more than 10 times more often than we thought. Tech demo, a new way of organizing technology that is there. second news item that was there, and I sure hope, let me just quickly check. Do you have the slides or no? Okay. The second news item, and I just really wanted to see the image, is a new deep field of the James Webb Space Telescope. And it reminds us that about 1 million miles from the Earth, kind of in the direction of midnight, is a telescope that is beating all the odds in terms of what it can do. I've always wondered, frankly, how Galileo felt in 1609 and 1610, when for the first time he looked at the telescope and looked at Jupiter and saw that there's other places. As he write down in a notebook, there's accompanying stars, he said initially. Then they started moving, learning about nature with new eyes. I always wonder how that feels. And I think I know better now, because just a few days before the first images of the deep field were revealed by the president to the public, I saw those images, and I remember through my teary eyes kind of looking at this and realizing that this is one of those moments that we're doing. Of course, that we're in fact attacking that boundary that separates the known from the unknown. Of course, the reason that is possible is because of the amazing people, the team that have the courage to attack that. It is not easy to do these things. It is hard, like Buzz Aldrin reminded us earlier today from this quote of this famous speech by President Kennedy. But it is so worth it. What we're learning about nature, what we're learning about the universe, by far kind of surprises us each and every time. So what I'd like to do, by the way, the third image that was in the news last week was, there's two images. The first one is an X-class flare of the surface of the sun that, of course, reminds us that the sun is entering solar activity maximum. It's not there yet. There's 2 more years to go. And basically that flare, of course, had huge consequences on Earth and beautiful consequences. There's an image from Alaska. There's many others in social media of the space weather that is manifesting itself here on Earth as the magnetic bubble, the magnetosphere that protects our own planet, is compressed and accelerates particles that then are hitting the surface, hitting the atmosphere, and atmospheric ions that glow like a curtain that slowly moves in green colors or red colors, depending on the energy. What that reminds us, though, and I always said, like, I used to have a space weather warning system. It was the NASA email. Because of the 80-plus missions that were in orbit that I was responsible for, whenever there was a storm like this, kind of the anomaly started trickling in. And, you know, like waking up in the morning, it's like, I wonder what the problems are we have today, right? You know, if we always knew, oh, there's a space storm because we have a lot of single event upsets or sometimes more serious. And so for me, those are the three news items. For me, science, you know, besides being so much at the core of the entire Moon to Mars strategy, is also one that really enhances inspiration and kind of the view that's out there. In the last 6 years, the one that the science stories that had the biggest kind of real-time viewers were Mars Perseverance lander. You know, we all had time, right, sitting at home. Looking at this, but the other one was START. Kind of the first time humanity changed the trajectory of a celestial object in a deliberate fashion. Of course, learning to put a tool set in our tool in our box of available to actually protect humanity from celestial impacts from these small objects. The largest engagement of any story that we've had in the last 6-7 years was the eclipse in 2017, where after a study we did, we could show that 80% of Americans interacted with the content that we had worked on. I have no doubt whatsoever that NASA in 23 and 24 will do that again with both a ring-like eclipse and then a full eclipse in these years respectively. So for me, what I want to point out is really the leadership that comes from this, that really, again, goes across the boundaries that are there. I'm going to ask again Do you think you're going to get those slides, or why don't we use the longer slide deck and I just jump over it?
Yeah, I was going to just go ahead and
Yeah.
bring up the longer deck, and you can run through those.
Yes, and then I just jump over it. So I'm going to speak on fewer slides than were there. I'll just give you quickly a chance to catch up with me.
I want to say something while we're waiting,
Please.
Thomas. For the benefit of the group, I don't think there is a leader of the Science Directorate ever that has presided over so much groundbreaking science. Well done, Thomas.
Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Tori. And many of them sat on rockets made by your company, and of course also the SpaceX rockets that are there. The priorities I wanted to focus on, just go quite quickly. I was going to start with that, is just so you know where I'm going with this. The first one is really focused on climate science and the sense of urgency I have there. The second one is really the inclusion, and frankly, Colonel Melroy did a great job talking about this. I'm going to hit that less strongly because she did such a good job. We really must kind of be successful together, kind of like we are here on Earth with breakthrough science. And I want to talk about the sense of urgency. Leadership is fragile, no matter who we are. And innovation, making progress is critical. And a lot of this is partnerships with others. So go forward. Next. This is the first image. You see the samples there on the ground that was published. This is one of 10 samples of Perseverance. The next one. There we go. Here's your, by the way, the front there is our clusters over 150 million years ago. In a time frame of 150 million years, they interacted with each other. This is 4 billion years, kind of light years away. And of course, 50,000 or so galaxies in the background of that view. Some of them will be very far. There are many, many early galaxies that we never knew, many more than the models predicted. So this is really already shaking at the foundation of science, which is exactly what we wanted to do. Next. Next. These are the two images that I mentioned about space weather. Next. A methane plume that was in the news as well. I think Colonel Melroy already talked about this. Next. All right, so what I want to do now is really talk about the climate topic quickly and really focus on NASA as a pivotal leader in civil space and our understanding of our own planet and how it affects us. NOAA, of course, partners with NASA on building systems that, frankly, have had huge impact. I use their data every day as I get dressed to figure out whether I take the big jacket or the little jacket or the snow boots or gym shoes. And in addition to that, frankly, it has saved many lives because of the fact that we managed to get people out of the way of storms. And frankly, once storms are over, can propose and actually can help kind of the process that brings people back to their normal lives and gets rid of the debris and so forth. This is a mission that was in the news last week also. It's the NISAR payload that is the first mission with a big partnership with India, that the payload is just about ready to be shipped to India for launch later on. There are 3 principal firsts in this. It is already, as I said, the first partnership with India at the large scale. The second piece is that it is a mission that from the word go has the application community directly involved in it. The product that will go out that will change lives, whether it's focused on ice, whether it's debris, fields, kind of landslides, and so forth, they're already being developed together with the user communities that will use them. And the third piece is that it's the largest data that will ever come down from a single mission that is there. So it's really, if you want, bringing big data into space, in this case from a single platform. Those are the principles. By the way, all these data are open and freely available, and frankly also together with the code that generated them. So it's really an open science approach. Those are the very principles on the next slide that are the Earth's System Observatory that is there. And frankly, it's the Surface Deformation and Change version of that. NISAR is there. All the others will be built as we go forward. And just to show an example of that, the next slide, and why it's important to get contemporary measurements of that, the next slide gives you two instances of observing the Earth. Go back. Sorry, I said next. I apologize. It gives two instances of observing the Earth. The first one is two images of a reservoir on the west side of the United States, and the other one is the cumulative water change that includes not only the water at the surface but also below the surface. That's measured with advanced telescope a gravity measurement with two spacecraft that are localized within to each other within the accuracy of a hydrogen atom, kind of in terms of scale. And so if you do that right, you can actually measure the water below the surface. So if you're a manager focused on water, of course you care about the fact that, like we said, we have a record-breaking winter in the Rockies, and that's good. How much of the problem that solves, though, remains to be seen, because you see that bluish trend going down is the depletion of the groundwater below the surface, which of course is also part of that management task. And therefore we need both of these measurements to actually provide that information for the managers that are there. That's just one of many examples. The next slide is very much aligned with what we heard already, is the emergence of commercial imagery, this case from Planet. This, of course, is the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, the outflow into the Gulf of Mexico of debris and organics, which of course have huge implications for property owners there, but also for fisheries and otherwise. I want to tell you that I'm really proud that during the last 6 years at NASA, we created one of the leading data buy programs looking at data from commercial partners, whether it's Maxar, whether it's Planet, Spire, a number of other companies. And these data are really having a huge impact, not only for the utility of the data, but also in the context of understanding climate. Because for the first time, some papers that are out there and are about to come out, we can actually go and count trees and measure, for example, the depletion of CO2 as it's built into organics, kind of trees and bushes and so forth, and measure that accurately. So for me, I want to make sure that you understand that, of course, these are useful and absolutely critical to use for the application domain, which is very much the primary market of what these companies had in mind, but are also critical for the underlying science that is there. And so for me, I just really want to tell you how passionate I believe we can be and rightly are about these kind of commercial data sources that are there. The next slide. Next slide. Remember, I was going to cut a lot of things out. And next slide. I put comments there if you seek to look at it. I want to tell you that there are problems that we've encountered in building this system, and frankly, the overall kind of support that's available by Congress right now is not sufficient to really do everything I just told you. It is not available, and frankly, needless to say, it's the job of Congress to set priorities, just like it is in other places. And I just want to tell you that that really gives me anxiety, especially because of a paper that came out in 2022 about climate tipping points. I want to tell you that 6 years ago, when I started at NASA, roughly, or 7 years ago, the presence of climate tipping points, those are changes in climate that have massive impact and frankly are not reversible on a short time scale. The presence of sub-tipping points were enormously controversial. I think that's no longer the case with some of these presentations that are there. And frankly, what will happen, and that's really important, and as we look at technology and investments overall, if these tipping points are really turning out to be manifesting as real, the entire research and analysis kind of enterprise probably needs to add components that are very different from the very open and kind of academic R&D type of work, but needs to go to more like mini Manhattan Project type of research in which directly data are being taken and frankly made useful and made actionable to users there. I'm deeply concerned about this, much more so than 6 years ago, because of the data that I'm looking at and because of the results that are coming out. And I wanted to tell you that I consider that in the climate side, consider that one of the big challenges right now. There's a lot of good that is happening, but there's not enough support for this pivotal work in the context of the nation's investment in space and the climate. The next slide. Is basically about discovery and technology. And I don't remember what the slide text, what the order is, because I was preparing on the other one. I apologize. What we have learned, of course, as we go forward and do this, is that leadership, as I said, Gene Kranz said, leadership is fragile. When he talked about human exploration, the same is true with all leadership. Any athletic coach knows that. If you take the eye off the ball and you're not striving for excellence, you're not going to be a leader in a long time. And I wanted to write down what I think are some of the principles. I think many of them were mentioned by Colonel Melroy, others by the general ahead of her, about the bipartisan support that is there and the entire stakeholder community that are there. Missions are not do not have teams of subsets of NASA of some type, but have teams with a capital T that include all the commercial partnerships, the international partners, and frankly, the science and application communities, and drive towards new technology and approaches. The rule I had at NASA is that every mission needs to have at least one new technology. And the simple reason for that is we want to enhance the set of technologies available. Sometimes those were tech demos. Sometimes there's a secondary bus that was launched with it, with the mission that was there, and sometimes both of these things. But they have to have the new technologies. And frankly, we will, when we innovate, we will have to iterate. Another way of talking about that is through the language of failure, which I don't like. Iteration and innovation always go together. Innovation will surprise us. And we need to have the courage of doing that. When we flew Ingenuity for the first time at Mars, I went on a plane and stood next to the principal investigator because, of course, the leader of this, Dr. Mimi Yang, because I wanted to make sure that if something went badly, we did not penalize the innovator. And it did not take off that day because we had a software problem. And what we did is we went on NASA, on social media, and I interviewed her, and I said, absolutely no problem. You already got to Mars. You already broke every record. Now go fly. I'll be back. And of course, the next time I was there, it in fact took flight. So for me, iteration is a critical part. That's why I want to tell you that. And the next generation.
That's probably a great place for us to do a segue here, since we're running a little bit out of time.
Okay.
Those words are certainly never more true than all the things we're trying to do in science, particularly in space, and really all the missions of space. So we really have benefited from having the opportunity to hear from you and your lessons learned. And we'll invite you back because we have another deck of slides that we haven't seen.
No, I have. I was a lot shorter. Sorry. I really apologize. We had a slight disconnect yesterday at 11 p.m. It seems.
Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah.
That's my. We'll make sure we take up that. Charlie?
I have to say one more tribute to Thomas, and it's an admission of how the NASA administrator can really be wrong. When they first came in and pitched Ingenuity to me, I threw everybody out. And I said, everybody knows that Mars's atmosphere cannot sustain any kind of flight. And they smiled and walked out, and I left. And Thomas came back in persistent and talked to the next administrator and demonstrated that that other guy, he flies airplanes, he doesn't know what he's talking about Mars. And so let's try this. And that's really important for those of you who are leaders here of corporations. Don't be too fast to throw people out just because you think that's not going to work.
Great lessons learned, Charlie. So, Thomas, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Well, many of you knew this already, but you can see why we wanted to have Thomas be part of our deliberation this morning, and we will definitely bring you back for future activities. Thank you very much. And God bless you, and hope the skiing is good.
I hope so, too.
Okay, I know we're behind our planned schedule. We're scheduled now for a lunch break. Lunch will be outside for us to gather that. And just for your information, particularly for the public that's listening in, we're going to break and grab lunch and try to restart just shortly before noon. I know that puts us behind schedule, but there are a couple of things that we have flexibility on our calendar, and we do still have a hard stop that we're going to adhere to. So let me do that. And JJ, I think you have something you want us to try to do with photographer.
All right, thank you, General Lyles. So you can leave all of your equipment here. There will be people in the room to monitor it, so please don't worry about that. Lunch is in the same room that we had breakfast, the salmon room, so you're just going to go up the escalators to the same level. And Aubrey, our photographer, is going to attempt to quickly get a group photo, right? This is the first time we've all had an opportunity to get together. So as you're walking out on the way to lunch, she will guide us to where she's going to take the photo. Just take your name tag off, put it in your pocket for that moment, and we will see you here at noon. Thank you.